All right, we are back with chapter 14 of Matthew.
Yay.
Yeah, we are back.
A lot of
Now,
interesting things in this chapter.
There are a few some interesting
reflect on.
things. There are some interesting things. There are some miracles. There are some really crazy people.
Oh, yeah.
There,
to say the
there,
least.
there are they are there, and there are some amazing things that happen.
We are going to start with the last two verses from chapter 13.
As we do.
And they were offended in him because Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and his own house. And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief.
All right, that was when he went home and visited Nazareth, the Nazareth area.
And it is true that sometimes we go back a different person, and people struggle to see us as a different person, and we have to be patient about that.
Absolutely.
But be persistent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is no good segue between 13 and 14.
No.
It ends in him visiting Nazareth, and it jumps to Herod. And in verse 1 and 2, it talks about Herod, the tetrarch, means he's in charge of that area.
Actually, tetrarch means 4 parts. I looked that up.
Mm-hmm.
He was
One of 4.
because the region that his father was ruler over, he divided into 4 parts when he died.
Yep. And so he's the tetrarch.
Keep talking. I gotta get.
He's one of 4. But he heard of the fame of Jesus out there. He heard of Jesus and what he's doing and the miracles that he's performing out there and the preaching. And he goes, it must be John come back from the dead.
Yes.
So Herod's conscience is bothering him. He's feeling guilty. Why? Because he killed a man of God unjustly. He killed a man of God, and his conscience is bothering him.
Yes.
And verse 3 actually starts a flashback.
Yes.
It's not just in the movies; it's in the Bible too. They're in there. They start talking, and then they flash back to previous to explain what they're talking about. Why is Herod worried about John being dead? Because the last we heard, he was just in jail. He wasn't dead yet. But anyway, but in verse 3, Herod put John in jail. John came up to him and told Herod that he wasn't supposed to be with the woman that he was with. It was unlawful. And it is wrong on many levels. It was his, to begin with, it was the reason he told him it was unlawful is because he was with his brother's wife.
So let's talk about
And
that
she
crazy
looked up
genealogy.
to Herod's.
I did.
This is some crazy stuff.
Okay, there were 4 sons of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas was one, and Herod the Great, when he died, and as we talked about before, Herod the Great died a horrid death.
Horrid man. Remember, he's the one that killed all the babies when Jesus was born. Killed all the 2-year-old and younger.
And from his lifestyle, he had suffered many illnesses. One of them probably led to the bladder and kidney problems, and he couldn't urinate. And that causes bad things to your body.
Yeah, he died a very painful, miserable death.
Herod Antipas was not quite as feared. He was called Herod Antipas, and he was given the land of Galilee and Perea. His brother Archelaus ruled Judea and Samaria.
Okay.
Herod Philip II ruled Eutrea and Trachonitis. And then there was Lycinus, who ruled Abilene. Herod, as he said, Herod Antipas thought that Jesus was some reincarnation of John the Baptist, and he feared him and feared what he was doing. So he was afraid to touch him. He was afraid to do anything to him. It's interesting, though, that part of his ministry was in Judea and Samaria, in the area of Archelaus. So he kind of went back and forth between Herod Antipas and Archelaus. And it's funny that he didn't even think about it, but Jesus' ministry started before John the Baptist was killed. So he really didn't have an understanding.
His conscience was really bothering him.
But the truth is, none of the Herods, Herod the Great or Herod Antipas and his brothers, they weren't really Jewish. They were put there by the Roman rulers, and so they weren't really totally aware of Jewish law. They knew enough of it that they probably, Herod Antipas knew what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah, but they didn't know it like a Jew would know.
Right. His wife, Herodias, was the granddaughter of Herod the Great. She first married her uncle Herod Philip II. He was a half-brother of Herod Antipas. And they had a daughter named Salome. That's the daughter that danced for
Yep.
Herod
She's
Antipas.
the daughter that dances in 6 and 7.
Right. So Herodias went from one uncle to the other. And Herod left his first wife, who was the daughter of the Nabatean king Archelaus. Archelaus did attack Herod, but the Romans protected him.
Right.
But Herod Antipas was fearful of killing John. He actually had dreams, nightmares about it, of killing John, but he made a promise to Salome in front of the court. And he kind of had to keep that promise. He was manipulated by his wife. And the interesting thing for me about that was probably about 2 chapters back, we talked about where Jesus told people not to make promises.
Not to make oaths.
Not to make oaths. Well, it was kind of an oath that he made to her.
Well, he made an oath to her, but Jesus said not to make oaths.
Sometimes oaths, you don't know everything that Jesus knows, and we make an oath based on what we know, and that oath can come back on us. So we need to be very careful of that, but he was not. But the other interesting thing is, as I was reading through it, Salome, later on, it seems she even married her father. So John the Baptist was trying to tell them, you're the leader of the Jewish people, and you need to be aware of our laws. And the verse that relates back to what John said directly to Herod and to his wife is in Leviticus. There's 2 in Leviticus. One is chapter 18, verse 16. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy brother's wife. It is thy brother's nakedness. And in Leviticus 20:21 it says, and if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is impurity, he hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. And there was no record that Herod had any children, especially not with her.
Mm-hmm.
And he too did not die a very pleasant.
He did not die a pleasant death either.
So John was really telling them, this is what we believe, and saying, you're insulting us. People, and we've talked before, maybe not with the Matthews verses, but the thing about divorce, and they would divorce their wife to be with somebody else for a while, marry them, then divorce them, then go back to their first wife.
Yeah.
And Jesus, that was a sin, and it was going against God's word, and this all was even worse than that, I think, going against God's word. Okay,
yeah.
We'll
so
move
not
on.
only was it unlawful, it was wrong on many levels.
Extremely.
There is nothing healthy about this relationship whatsoever.
Not at all.
And so this is why John's in jail.
Because he spoke the truth.
Because he spoke the truth to people that didn't want to hear it. And oddly enough, Herodias is the one that was truly offended, not Herod.
Yeah.
Herod knew Herod the tetrarch here, Herod knew what he was doing was wrong. He was aware of that. But Herodias is the one that really got offended. And the problem is she was jumping from king to king here, trying to elevate her position.
Yes, that's exactly.
She was getting her position in this. And she...
My allergies.
And she got her daughter involved.
Yes.
She not only was doing these dirty deeds herself, she got her daughter involved on her behalf. Her young daughter. I don't know how old.
She was 14.
Young, yeah, she was roughly around 14 years old during this. So we have this child, essentially, doing erotic dances for her stepdad, uncle thing. Yeah. stepfather, uncle, something. Anyway, and it works. She pleases Herod, is what it says. She pleases him, and he's so excited and so pleased by her. He's willing to give her up to half his kingdom. He says, "Tell me, I'll give you anything you ask for." That implies that there was more involved than a dance.
Probably
that
more.
implies, if all she did was dance, I mean, there's an implication that there may have been something else going on here, other than a dance. But nevertheless, leave it as it is. It says she danced for him, and he was pleased with it, and he said, and so he made an oath that he would give her whatever she asked for,
Right.
and he did it in front of the court. And she wanted, as she was instructed by her mother, she asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter, to be served on a platter, on a serving platter at this feast that they were at. That's nasty. People are trying to eat here. That's nasty. And but he was trapped because he's afraid of the people. He's supposed to be the ruler, but he's afraid of the people. That's part of the reason he didn't kill John, and that's part of the reason why he had to kill him. He's being manipulated by the people. This is not a very strong man. This is not a very strong ruler.
No.
He's very much manipulated by whatever's going on. He's just trying to stay in the big seat. That's all he's trying to do, and be popular. And in this case, it cost John his head. And it says the scripture warns about pleasing men instead of pleasing God. And that's where Herod's at. He's pleasing men instead of pleasing God. Anyway, but it cost John his head, and so John is beheaded. They bring it to Salome on a platter, and she turns around and hands it to her mother. And then John's disciples in verse 12 come and take his body and bury it properly, bury his body properly, what they can, without a head, and then go tell Jesus. And so now, in verse 13, Jesus finds out that his friend and cousin has been murdered. It's not just that he died a sick death. He's the same age. Jesus is about 6 months older than he is. They're roughly the
John's
same age.
6 months older.
John's
than
6
Jesus.
months older than Jesus. They're roughly the same age.
Right.
And now, and I mean, they would have known each other. I mean, this is, and it's his cousin and his friend, and now he's dead. And so he wanted to be alone. So in verse 13 it says that he departed thence by a ship to a deserted place. And it says he went alone. In other Gospels it says he took his disciples with him, and they went to be alone. But the people knew where he went, found out where he went, and they followed on foot. And so what he went to on ship, they followed on foot, which means he got there probably before them for a little while, but they followed, which means they probably went quite a ways. If they were following on foot what he went by boat, they're a ways from home, which is important. They're a ways from home.
Yeah, the people kept coming. They were hungered for him.
And this is important. No matter where we are, no matter who we are in our walk with God, sometimes we need a minute.
True.
Even Jesus needed a minute. At this point, he needed a moment to be alone. He needed a moment to grieve. He needed a moment to absorb in what was going on, what happened, as a man. And so, but the people followed. They don't realize his grief. It's not that they're unfeeling towards him. They don't understand. They don't know. They don't necessarily know the connection between him and John. They may not even know John's dead. It's one of those. But they're following Jesus. They want to get to him because he has something they want. In verse 14, he saw them. A great multitude had followed him, and he was moved with compassion. Compassion is more than just feeling sorry for someone. Compassion is moved to action, and so he was moved to an action. He moved with compassion. He ministered to them, and he healed all of their sick that they had brought to him.
Put aside the grief he had.
He put aside his own grief in order to minister to them.
And that's a hard thing to do. To put aside your struggle or your issue because something before you or someone before you needs your attention.
That's right.
But God strengthens us as
So-
we do that.
Yep.
And you said it before. You said it actually Sunday or Saturday night. We were talking, and we talked at a group on Sunday that we act, and God is waiting sometimes to see if we will act, to know when we're truly ready for the next step,
Yes.
the next
Sometimes.
the next part. Have we grown enough to move to the next thing that's more challenging
This is true.
to us?
This is true. And sometimes and if we follow Jesus' example of how to deal with grief or depression or trials in life, what he did, number one, he prayed.
Yes.
He would get by himself and he would pray with the Father, pray to the Father, and he would have a discussion with Dad. That's what he would do. That's what
Which
he did.
oddly enough we can too.
And oddly enough, we can too. We can follow that example. We can do that too. And so he would have a talk with him. And on the other hand, and what he did after that, and very much so, he would seek to help others. He would he would serve others. And instead of dwelling inwardly on himself and being consumed in
Yes.
himself, he helped others.
Outwardly.
He found out how he could help others. But and the compassion that he moved there should be the compassion that's in us, because Christ is in us.
And when you lay that problem there, leave it at his feet.
Absolutely.
That's the other part of his example of serving. You've given it to God in prayer. You've let him know, which he already knew, but you've let him know what you needed him to hear from you, or what he needed to hear from you. It's at his feet.
That's right.
Move on.
And then you move on. Verses 15 through 21, Jesus does an exceptional miracle. And the reason I say it's an exceptional miracle, looking back on it, like we got raising the dead, we got
Healing lepers.
we got healing lepers, the blind seeing, the dumb
mute.
speaking,
Mhm.
the dumb speaking, the deaf hearing. A little bit later in this chapter, we got walking on water. But this one is the only miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels. That's significant. And I'm not sure exactly the full amount of why that is so significant. I'm not sure I grasp the entirety of it, but I do know it's very, very important, and we need to talk about it because it's in all four Gospels. It's the only one.
And I'm going to give my thought on it.
Okay?
It is the miracle that blows so many people away because how many people were involved. I
Yes.
think that it stays in so many people's minds. I think it's also the miracle that many people struggle to believe.
It is.
More than anything else, because the number of people that were involved.
Yes, right.
So now let's talk about that miracle. In depth.
Well, they were there, and of course there was multitude. It was getting towards the evening, and he looked at them and realized these people are hungry. They've traveled a long way. They've been there all day. They don't have anything to eat, and or as far as they can tell. And so he looks around, and the disciples say, send them away so they can go get food. And he said they don't need to go anywhere. We can, he tells them to feed them. They don't need to go anywhere. We'll feed them. And this is our first lesson. This is our first lesson. If you see somebody in need,
yes,
you don't send them somewhere else. You take care of them. Because Jesus said, and the disciple says, we don't have nothing to take care of them with. Jesus said, yes, we do.
and and he's right about that, because oftentimes it is not something outside of our ability to do. Giving somebody a bottle of water because it's hot outside.
Yeah.
Or giving them a ride because it's hot outside, and it's struggle for people.
Yeah.
Giving them some fruit. It's you do what you have there to do with, but the fact is, do it.
Yeah. And that's Jesus' first example in this miracle, is that you don't send people away when you can help them.
Right.
And you don't shove your responsibility to help people off onto somebody else. You take care of them.
Amen.
You take care of them. he said, they don't need to go anywhere, give them something to eat. And they said, we don't have anything but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, bring them here. And he had everybody sit down, and which is a lot of people. That took up a lot of area. He had them all sit down, and then he blessed and then he prayed to the Father and blessed the food and broke the bread and the fish and gave it to them to distribute. And so the 12 disciples took what little they had, and they went and started delivering it. And they didn't run out.
Right.
And in fact, after everybody had eaten, and we're talking 5,000 men, plus women and children. And
so you're roughly probably close to 15,000. I mean, you
very
figure
likely,
5 and 5.
Very likely,
probably more than that.
Very likely at least 15,000 people. And after the 5 loaves and 2 fishes fed all these people, up to 15,000 people or more, there were 12 baskets of food left over, bushel baskets of food left over. And here's another lesson. Well, there's the second lesson of when God blesses it and tells you to go do something, just go do it. Take it and give it to him. Just go do it. And another lesson for what the multitude did when Jesus told them to sit down, and they did. They did what they were told. They did their part. They did their part. The disciples did their part, and Jesus did his part. There's a huge lesson there for us.
Yeah,
let Jesus do his part.
Correct. And think about that. You said the people did their part. The people came in faith.
They came in faith.
They did not know what was going to happen. They didn't know if they were going to be fed, but they came in faith. When Jesus told them to sit down, they sat down in faith because they followed him in faith. They were hungering for him.
Yep.
He fed them with the word, he fed them in the spirit, and then he fed them physically.
Sometimes it's all right just to sit down and wait to be fed.
Yes.
There's a lesson. Sometimes it's just okay to sit down and wait for God to feed you because that's what he told you to do. And so you follow that direction, even if it seems just simple. It was very simple. Right. Just sit down and wait. And so they did, and he fed them, and they got 12 bushel back. Here's one of my favorite parts of lesson of this miracle. God doesn't just provide. He doesn't just provide just enough for you to get by. He provides more than you need, way more than you need. When God shows up, I've heard it said, when God shows up, God shows off. And when you do when you let Jesus do his part, when you do your part, and then let Jesus do his part, and he'll show off. He won't just bless you. He will bless you in a big way. He will bless you in a way that nobody can deny the blessing.
And if you have the hands open to share, if you have the hands open to receive, you can receive it. But if what you're doing is pulling it back into yourself, you have closed fists, you have closed arms, you have closed hands. You can't bless that.
And that's where the disciples started.
Yes, they did. They
had this little bit, and they were like this with it, and Jesus said, give it to me.
No, it's here. They got back more than they gave because God gives more.
A lot
Way
more. And like I said, it's the only one that's mentioned in all 4 of the Gospels. It's Matthew 14. It's in Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 9, and John chapter 6. Go look them up. And I think it is far more significant than what I understand. I think there's more to it than what I personally understand. I get a lot out of it, but I'm just convinced there's more to it because they all remembered.
Well,
and they all felt it was significant to write down.
I have a thought about that too.
What's that?
If at any time the Pharisees and Sadducees could have discredited the Gospels, they would have done it.
There's a lot of people that were there to witness this one.
But you got more than 5,000 people who could speak about firsthand.
Yeah.
It made it very hard to discredit. And I think that's also why it was important to be in each gospel, because it helped to support and strengthen each one of them and their message and the gospel they wrote.
That is very possible, the major part of it, because when the council asked the blind man, were you healed by Jesus? He said, I don't know. He said, I can't tell you. I'm not. Basically what he told him is, I'm not a smart man. I'm not a theologian. I don't know. All I do know is I was blind and now I can see. That's what I know. And by what power he did it, I can't confess to that. But what I know is I was blind and now I can see. And these people said I was hungry and now I'm not.
I also believe that the significance of that number was also because as we move further in Matthew, Jesus' ministry made several changes throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
Having that many people, when they go to beat him and crucify him, they needed the multitudes for that too. So I think it was God took what was happening, used it for good. Then there was some negative, but he also used that for good too.
And there could be like when the disciples, after Jesus was gone and the disciples were out spreading the gospel, when they went out to spread the gospel and they were preaching Jesus Christ, there were people going, I remember him. And even as children, as they grew up, I was there as a child.
Yes. And
I remember that. I remember that man. I remember him feeding us out of nothing. I remember that. And so it's one of those things. I think it's important for children to see miracles, for children to hear the gospel, because when they get older, they go, I remember that. You know, and I know what you're talking about. And so, but then after he gets through feeding them all, in verse 22 it says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go on ahead of him, or go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. Okay, so the disciples left in a ship, and now he's got, and so he gets to stay there, and he sends the multitude home. Now, before he goes after to follow the disciples, he goes up into the mountain to pray. And I think it's important to remember that through all of this, Jesus' day started with him finding out his cousin was murdered.
Yes.
And now he's been ministering to other people all day, and now he needs to talk to God for a minute. He needs to collect himself. He needs to be ministered to himself. He needs to be ministered to. Yes. And so he goes to the Father alone. He goes up to the mountain to pray. In the meantime, the disciples are out in the boat, out in the middle of the water, and they're out there in the middle of the water, getting tossed and turned, and the waves are high, and it gets to be about the fourth watch, which we looked it up. It's somewhere by Roman calendar at the time. It's somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning. That's the fourth watch. So the sun may have been really dark, or the sun may have been starting to come up to where it's kind of hazy, and we'll get to them later. And it may be hazy. But anyway, maybe it was from the lights, or maybe it was sun was starting to come up. I don't know. But they were able to see Jesus walking towards them on the water. And as they saw him, they thought it was a ghost. But Jesus called out and said, don't be afraid.
Verse 26, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. And verse 26 relates back to Job, and I'm going to read two different ones from Job. Both of them are in chapter 9, starting verses 7 through 8. He speaks to the sun, and it does not shine. He seals off the light of the stars. He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. And then Job, verse in 1 through 13, in Job chapter 9, 1 through 13, Job is describing God's power. And Jesus demonstrated his power as God walking on the water.
His power over the creation.
And Job also cried out about his unworthy state. In 7 and 8, he describes Jesus' power over his creation. And Job, then Job knew God's strength. Job knew that God took care of his people, and that God was a healer and God was a giver. And it's referencing the power of God and the power over the sin in our lives.
That's right.
Okay.
And in verse 27 they cried out in fear, and he said, don't worry, it's me. And Peter said, in verse 28, Peter said, if it's really you, ask me to come up to you. And Jesus said, come on.
He did.
Jesus said to come. Called him out of the boat. And Peter stepped out into the water. And so there's two people that the Bible records walked on water. Jesus and Peter.
Peter. And Peter started out focused on Jesus with excitement, and he, when he was focused on Jesus, he could step out because Jesus called him out. Jesus said, I mean, he's telling him, it's my strength will hold you. And as long as he was focused on Jesus, he could do the things he couldn't do. He could walk on that water. But the moment that he lost his focus on Jesus and began to look at the storm and be fearful of all the commotion around, and commotion, movement around you when you're trying to stand still, creates a chaos and creates an anxiety. And if we focus on that, we lose the ability to find the path and find solutions.
Well, this is where I tell people, faith and fear do not abide at the same time.
No, they do not. And
you can't have faith and be afraid at the same time.
So
and when you have faith, you're not afraid.
When you say, Lord Jesus, settle my spirit, then what you are truly saying is, Satan, that fear you brought into my life, I'm not taking hold of it. I'm not I'm not accepting it as my responsibility, my authority, because Jesus has the authority in my life. And when you focus back on him, he shows you the path. He gives you the step, the way, each step and each moment, and the chaos stops.
That's right. Now, if you imagine, I've said this before, and quite honestly, I'd be one of the 11 that stayed in the boat. I'm not getting out of the boat. I'm not Peter. I'm not that person. She might be. She might do it. But I'm one of the 11. I'd stayed in the boat. But Peter got out. Peter walked on water. A human, flawed, born just like everybody else. This is not the Son of God by any means. This man is flawed from one end to the other. But because of his faith in Jesus, he walked on water. Now, granted, he got distracted, and he started doubting. And I love this part. And this is why Jesus asked him why he doubted. He doubted what he was doing while he was doing it. Now,
that's a hard thing.
It's a hard thing. I understand doubting and not getting out of the boat. What I don't understand is, and I'm granted, I've probably done it and will do it again, but I don't understand getting out of the boat, walking on the water, and then doubting that I can do it while I'm doing it.
That's again what I'm talking about.
But he got distracted and lost his and got distracted from his faith and let fear enter in while he was doing it.
When Jesus is right there and his focus just right there, and he's looking at him.
But here's the best part. Peter doubted. Peter was afraid. Peter doubted while he was doing what Jesus told him to do, and he started to fail doing what he was supposed to be doing.
But
and
what did he do?
And he called out to Jesus for help, and Jesus grabbed him and pulled him up. And they walked back to the boat.
So even
Peter walked on the water twice.
So even when we stumble,
Jesus is still there.
And you tell people, if you're going to fall,
fall forward. Keep moving in the forward direction.
And he came back to Jesus. His focus came back to Jesus, and he was lifted up again.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now, Jesus did ask him, why'd you doubt?
Right.
But he didn't turn his back on him. He didn't throw him out for it. They went back to the boat.
Yeah. I can't say that I've experienced anxiety before when things have happened in my life that took me for big loops that I didn't expect. I've experienced depression. It is hard for me, and I try very hard to understand when anxiety has such a grip. And you are not a lesser person, you're not a lesser Christian.
That's right.
Because anxiety grips.
That's right.
But I want to emphasize what this verse is saying, what this chapter is saying. Just keep looking. Look forward and call out, because he will be there.
Absolutely.
And let him be the calm.
Yeah. And when they got to the boat, now keep in mind the storm's still going on, but as soon as they got into the boat, the wind stopped.
Yes.
The wind and the wave stopped. It became calm because the master was in the boat.
Correct.
And it says those that are in the boat came to him and worshipped him and called him the Son of God. Now, the way it words that implies to me that there was more people in the boat than just the disciples.
Possibly.
Because they didn't call it a boat, he called it a ship.
Yeah.
It's a big boat.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a ship. It was people. It was a ship that was carrying people, carrying people from one side of this lake or lake to the other side. It was, and so these were people that were traveling,
Mm-hmm.
and so everybody in the boat witnessed to this. This is not just the disciples. There were more than 12 people in the boat.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the implication here is. And everybody that was in the boat fell down and worshiped Jesus and identified him as the Son of God. Because who else could have walked on the water?
Who else could have picked Paul up? Who else could have brought him out, caught him when he started to fall, and brought him back again?
That's right. And if there was other people in the boat, which I believe there were, other people in the boat. When you get to verse 34 through 36, it explains why this happened in verse 34 and 36. Because it says in 34 that when they had gone over, which means they got to the other side of the lake, or the sea, or whatever they were on, they came to the land of Gennesaret. I have trouble with some of these names. I really do. My hillbilly tongue doesn't quite get around some of these words. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him. Now, where did they get the knowledge of him? They got the knowledge of him from the people on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
The people on the boat ran off the boat saying, "You've got to see this guy."
Yeah.
You know, we just watched him walk on water. You've got to come see this guy. And so the word got around, and everybody, they went throughout the entire country land, the area, and brought their people that are sick and diseased. Disease is so much more than just a sickness. A sickness is like the flu, and or you got the cold. That's a sickness. We're talking disease. These people are crippled. These people are chronic problems. They're not going to get better. A sickness you can get better from.
Right.
These are diseases. They're going to stick around. And they brought all of their diseased people, and they besought him, and they had such faith. They were like the woman with the issue of blood. All they wanted to do was touch his garments. They said, "If we could just touch your garment, we know that we will be healed." And everyone that touched him was made completely whole. And so if they were missing a hand, they now had two. If they were lame, they could now walk. If they were blind, they could now see. If they were lepers, they were cleansed. This is the power of God. And this is the miracles that he did. Now I want to point out, this is the end of chapter 14, but let's reflect back to the end of chapter 13. There is a stark contrast between the end of these two chapters. At the end of chapter 13, it was depressing. It was a horrible thing. Hometown, and they rejected him, and he did almost no miracles. All of their sick remained sick. All of their blind remained blind. They were not benefited by this at all, by knowing him, and they should have. And these people who were strangers to him came running up to him to be healed, and he healed them all. Healed them all. This land no longer had any sick or diseased people in it at this time. They were all healthy. That's such a boon to a society to be healthy like that, and it's such a stark contrast. And the difference is, one recognized him as the child they knew growing up, and they were offended by him thinking he was a prophet, and the other ones recognized him as the Son of God.